Someone dies from a stroke every 4 minutes. It's the third leading cause of death and disability. My guest this week on Community Health is Pastor Kevin Kelly, a healthcare professional, a businessman, a husband, father, and grandfather, and the pastor of the largest African American church in Arkansas. A true alpha male, as he describes himself. He is also a stroke survivor. Join us as we talk candidly about the symptoms, treatments, and life after a stroke. He, true to his calling, wishes to help others by talking about the symptoms, the forms, and the aftermath of living with a stroke.
After having my stroke, of course, I looked for somewhere that I could receive information and hope, in that of my recovery, but I really didn't find anything effective.
Wishes to help stroke survivors and their families. Join us for Community Health this Saturday at 3 p.m. and next Tuesday at 10 a.m. as we discuss a stroke.
Are you connected? Are you informed? Get in the know and keep abreast of what you need to know. Community Health, hosted by Alvin Simmons. Join him. Get informed with Community Health on V100.9.
Hi, this is Alvin with Community Health, your locally broadcast program about the health events in the state. Our sponsors are the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, Habibis Incorporated, and AFMC, Arkansas Foundation for Medical Care. If you would like to become a sponsor, please drop me a line. We will be back with the health announcements we have thus far.
I'm Belinda Hintz, and this is your AFMC Health Minute. Every 40 seconds, somebody in the United States has a stroke. A stroke happens when your brain doesn't get enough blood. It is a leading cause of death and disability in the U.S. May is National Stroke Awareness Month, and it's a good time to learn how to identify a stroke quickly. Just remember to think fast. F is for face. See if one side of the face droops when a person smiles. A is for arms. Check if one arm falls down when both arms are raised. S is for speech. Does their speech slur when they talk? T is for time. If you see any of those symptoms, call 911 right away. We have more information about strokes right now at afmc.org. AFMC, improving healthcare, improving lives.
This is Alvin with Community Health, and today I have a very special guest that's going to be on with me. I'm extremely pleased and excited to have him. Pastor Kevin Kelly is here. And Pastor Kelly, before we get into too much detail, I just want to maybe for you to talk about yourself. I know you're famous here in Little Rock, and most people probably know you, but a great deal of the people don't. Because, for example, when I think of you, the thing that I think of when I returned to America, I was working at Children's Hospital, and there was a black respiratory therapist there, and I think his name was Kevin Kelly, and he would be sitting in the cafeteria trying to eat his lunch, and he would get so many interruptions until he would just have to pick up his tray, put it back in the bin, and go back to work because people would be coming in the whole lunch break, stopping by his table, speaking. So I'm sure you're still just as busy today. So, tell us about Kevin Kelly. Who is Kevin Kelly?
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you, Alvin, for this opportunity just to share my story, because certainly my story is God's story, and I thank you for this interview, and I just appreciate you so very much. And let me just kind of tell you who I am. I'm just a little bitty country boy. I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas. I was 1965. I attended and graduated from Parkview High School, which is right in our neighborhood. It's right up the street from the church where I pastor. I graduated in 1983. I'm a proud graduate of Parkview Patriots. I completed respiratory therapy school about 3 or 4 years later, and I'm now a licensed registered respiratory therapist. I worked for several years at Children's Hospital for 13 years, very proud as a therapist there, helping children and certainly ministering to families. I received a bachelor's degree in leadership and ministry in the year of 2010 at Central Baptist College in Conway, which I'm a very proud graduate of Central Baptist, as they attempt to equip young men and women to do work of ministry. And so I'm also, I come from a lineage of preachers and pastors. My daddy was a pastor. My granddaddies on both my mama and my daddy's side were both pastors. I come from just a plethora of uncles who were preachers and pastors. Just very proud to be a pastor. Some of the things I like to do when I'm not in church is one of the questions that we have listed. I love swimming, and I love camping, and I love doing that by hanging out with my children and my grandkids. I have 3 daughters. They're all grown. God has blessed them. 2 of them are nurses. One is a school teacher. We have a great relationship as a family, and they have given me 3 grandsons. I tell people all the time, I think it's God paying me back because I have 3 girls, but now God is vindicating himself with me by giving me grandsons and sons-in-laws, and I'm just so excited. I love hanging out with them. I love camping. I have a business where I rent out RVs. It's called Vision RV Rental. I decided to take on that venture with my wife, and we did it because I always wanted to own an RV, and so and I use it as a business venture to rent my RVs out to other people who love to do camping, and as a result, we're able to own one and do our own family camping with my grandsons and my kids. And so it's just a great way for us to expand our finances beyond just what I do on a daily basis. And so I'm always a proponent of people enlarging their financial portfolio. And so that's my newest venture. Of course, I pastor Second Baptist Church. We are one church in multiple locations. Here in Central Arkansas, we have a location, of course. Our main location, which I'm most probably familiar with, is on Barrow Road. We also have a location in Southwest Little Rock, on the West 83rd Street, and then we have a location also in Maumelle, which, of course, during this pandemic, we have not been able to worship in 2 of our locations, but we've been worshiping since the 3rd Sunday in August.
Okay.
We've been worshiping at our main location, and we are soon to go back to our Southwest location as well as our Maumelle location as we begin to open up our services, and I'm excited about that. So I'll just now go back to you and allow you to ask me whatever questions you'd like to ask.
Okay. How did you become interested in respiratory therapy?
Well, to be honest, I was going to attending UALR, and because it was not my niche, it was not my calling, I wasn't doing as well as I should have academically. And my mom said, "Son, you got to find something else to do." And so she was on staff at Pulaski Vocational Technical School back then, is what it was called, and so she told me about the respiratory therapy program, and so I researched it, and I soon joined it, and I was accepted in it. And that's how I finished that program. And so basically because my mama, and I always wanted to be in a healthcare professional. And so through my mama's relationship with the school, I was able to get connected with that program. And, of course, I successfully completed it, worked in it in one hospital 13 years and also at Baptist Hospital for 2 years. So I'm a proud respiratory therapist.
Okay. Would you recommend that to young people as a profession today?
Oh yes, sir. Without a doubt, it is a very promising profession that continues to grow. You know, when you talk about COVID, of what we are facing now, there are certainly 2 healthcare professions that really deal with that directly. Certainly, that's the nurses who are taking instructions from the physicians, but also it is the respiratory therapists who's providing and oftentimes the updrafts. But as well, we're the ones that will be responsible for the ventilators and intubating the patients and assuring that they are able to have adequate life support. So I would recommend that to any young person. And of course, they still have the program at Pulaski Tech College, but also they now have a program. I've always had a program at UAMS, and it's more of a bachelor's program. And I would certainly recommend that to any young person that's looking for some kind of career pursuit.
Okay. As a minority, what do you think of it as a profession? I'm sorry I have to ask these questions because with us being minorities, we know what it's like to get into healthcare.
Oh, I would definitely recommend it. I think it could be very advantageous to any minority young person. They do have several scholarships out there, and so I would recommend it to any young person that's trying to find a career path. I would certainly ask them to put respiratory therapists as a potential career path. And, of course, they could go to places like Central Baptist, not Central Baptist, but Conway, UCA. They have a therapist program at UCA, and, of course, many of our kids out of Central Arkansas, many of them go to UCA, and so they have a segue education program for a bachelor's degree in respiratory therapy, and I would recommend that. Okay. And anyone that can call me if they needed more information, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, and now you are a preacher, and you say you come from a family of preachers, which brings to mind most people with that pedigree, the last thing they want to do is to be a preacher. So what changed your mind?
Well, it was certainly a call from God. I just felt it. I've always had a call on my life for ministry, and for many years in Central Arkansas, I was known as the minister of music. God had gifted me in music, and so I was the minister of music of the church that I'm now senior pastor of. I served under the pastor at that time for 10 years very faithfully, and I was very satisfied in that area, and of course I just continued to felt the nudge of God on me to carry His gospel and His word, and so of course it wasn't something I wanted to do, but it was something I felt compelled and called and had to do it. And so once I finally surrendered to the call back in '97, I began to be equipped and trained. I pastored my first church, First Baptist Church in Woodson, probably not even 2 years after receiving the call. And then after successfully pastoring there for 3.5 years, I was called back to the place where I had left as the minister of music, and been here now this year 22 years.
Wonderful.
Have had a very successful pastorate, and have become known as a leading church in this community and this area, and I praise God for it and give Him all the glory for that.
Okay, now that you've been doing this, I've always wanted to ask this question. Is being a pastor what you thought it was going to be?
I would say yes and no. I would say yes in the fact that I always expected it from seeing it from afar in the distance. I always expected it would be a place and a calling where you would be able to affect people's lives and as well influence the community. And being a pastor is somewhat like being a community leader. And so in that sense, it is what I expected. But in the sense of no, it's not. I did not probably expect some of the insincerities that a pastor deals with in members and, of course, the community personnel, but also, in the sense of bureaucracy when it comes to ministry. Sometimes in church we can make the bureaucracy, we can make it a drudgery in trying to get ministry accomplished. So yes, in the sense of affecting people's lives, but no in the sense of the insincerity and as well as the bureaucracy of ministry.
Okay, Pastor Kelly, number one, I want to commend you for coming on the show to talk about this subject. We have so many people in the minority community, especially, if they are sick or if they have a problem, they don't want to talk about it and they don't want to share it with anyone. And what most people tend not to know, these are problems that we have in the community, and if we would share it with others, we might be able to help someone. So today we're going to talk about a stroke, which is the third leading cause of death and disability in America, but still people refuse to talk about it. I saw on Facebook you posted that you were going to start a group. So just tell us briefly before we really get into it, what do you plan to do with this group, or what are you hoping to achieve? Okay. All
right, so let me tell you about our stroke support group now. After having my stroke, of course, I looked for somewhere that I could receive information and hope, in that of my recovery, but I really didn't find anything effective. I went to one stroke recovery support group. I was in there, Alvin, I bet you maybe 5 minutes, and my wife could tell that I was ready to go. I was ready to pack my stuff up because it wasn't anything that was really fitting, my needs at that time. And so, and of course, when you're in stroke, you have certain anxieties that you deal with, and so I was ready to pack the bags up and leave. And so I wanted to be able to. I had found purpose in my group because I wanted to be able to be to people what I didn't find myself in my stroke recovery. And so God put it on my heart in finding purpose in what I've been through and in my story to inspire other stroke survivors as well as caregivers in how to have hope in dealing with the recovery and the caregiving of stroke. And so, and that is certainly what I've done. And we have now been active and alive now. We began our first meeting in the month of February. And my purpose, again, has been to inspire hope through inspiration, education, and relations. So those are our pillars of our group. Inspiration, so we inspire others. Education, we educate others, but also relations, so we build relationship with each other. And we kind of use our support group as another family or the extension of the family of those that have had stroke, and it's been very successful. We started on our first meeting with 4 individuals, and in this upcoming meeting, I will have close to 24.
Okay, excellent, excellent. We're going to stop here for a break. This is Alvin with Community Health, and I'm talking with Pastor Kevin Kelly. We'll be back in just a minute.
Today's Here's to Your Health segment with Dr. T. Glenn Pate is brought to you by the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences.
The leading cause of paralysis is stroke. More than 1.5 million Americans have been paralyzed due to a stroke. A stroke occurs when the blood supply to part of the brain is suddenly blocked or when a blood vessel in the brain bursts, spilling blood into the spaces of the brain. In the same way that a person suffering a loss of blood flow to the heart is said to be having a heart attack, a person with a loss of blood flow to the brain or a sudden bleeding in the brain can be said to be having a brain attack. Paralysis is a common feature of stroke, often on one side of the body, a condition known as hemiplegia. The paralysis or weakness may affect only the face, the arm, or leg, or may affect one entire side of the body and the face. A person who suffers a stroke in the left hemisphere of the brain will show right-sided paralysis or paresis. Conversely, a person with a stroke in the right hemisphere of the brain will show deficits on the left side of their body. For Here's to Your Health, I'm Dr. T. Glenn Pate.
This is Alvin with Community Health, and I'm talking to Pastor Kevin Kelly. He is the pastor of Second Baptist Church, which I believe is probably the largest black church in Little Rock and possibly Arkansas. If I'm wrong, Pastor Kelly, tell me. Number 2, he is a stroke survivor, and he started a support group, and that's what we're going to talk about today in detail. So, Pastor Kevin, first, tell us about your stroke experience, if you don't mind.
Okay, Alvin, on Thursday night, November the 12th, the year of 2019, I had been at a Men's Day rehearsal because having a musical background, I was there conducting the rehearsal and teaching the men's songs for our Men's Day celebration. Had a long day, had a headache. It was probably a headache I'd never felt before. I mean, just an excruciating headache. I remember going by, leaving the church, and I was headed home. I went by Walgreens to try to get something for the headache, and probably on the way home I was having a stroke because I can remember things just getting very cloudy, and it was by the grace of God I made it to the house. I attempted to put my car in the garage, and I was probably only about 4 inches away from hitting the garage, and so went in the house, stumbled into the house. Of course, I was stumbling over things. My wife, because she was expecting me to come home, she heard me stumbling, fumbling over things, and so she knew something was wrong. I certainly went back in the bedroom, and just immediately laid down, and she began to ask me what was wrong, and she noticed that I was slurring in my speech. And of course, anybody that knows anything about stroke, there's an acronym called FAST, and it's encouraging to make sure that once you see the slurred speech, once you see the stumbling, and these are all the symptoms that I had, and she immediately called 911, of which I was asking her just let me go to sleep, which I'm so glad that she did not, because I did not know I was having a stroke. Next thing you know, I'm looking at a fireman in my bedroom, and I'm laying on my back, and they began to talk to me. They began to ask me questions. Of course, I had slurred speech. They asked her to go get me some water, and as I was trying to drink the water was just, of course, running down my mouth, and so they knew something was wrong, and so they immediately began to care for me right there in my own bedroom, and put me in the ambulance, and calling in, and I'm laying in the ambulance, and I'm thinking I'm having an out-of-body experience, because they began to say stuff like stroke to the hospital as they were calling in. I'm thinking, what? And come to find out, I had 3 ischemic strokes on the right side of my brain that has affected my left side, and so I hadn't had no previous symptoms whatsoever. I've had moderate blood pressure on the high side, but it was controlled. I had no arrhythmias. Even in my bedrooms, my heart was fine. And so, but typically, what happens with stroke is your heart kind of goes into some funky rhythm that they call atrial fibrillation. And so, evidently, I may have been in some kind of atrial fibrillation in a period where I didn't even know anything about it. And my right carotid artery was about 95% clogged. And so, once I got to the hospital, of course, they gave me TPA, which is a drug they give you to begin to burst up the clots. And so, so they did that. And of course, they sent me to CT, and was able to see, what the stroke affected me. And again, it was just some out-of-body experience. Probably a day or so later, I was in ICU, went from ICU up to the floor. So I was there probably a week or so, and then left there and went to rehab at Baptist and stayed there for 2 weeks and began my recovery process there. But immediately my left side, my left lower limbs began to come back. Probably before I left the floor, I was able to walk on my own. Praise God, no cane, no walker. Went over to rehab, and I began to discover that, how serious the left side of my upper limb was. And so I'm still dealing with that and believing God for a recovery on that completely on my left side, my left upper limbs. And so those are things I attempt to try to educate people on in my recovery group that we'll talk about later, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, continue. Okay, well, let me ask some questions then. What symptoms, now that you are familiar with it, what symptoms did you exhibit that you now know you had at the time?
Well, I would just continue to say
slurred speech.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the hypertension and the blocked arteries. Were there any other symptoms now that you look back that maybe you exhibited prior to this?
Yeah, prior to this, because of course I didn't know I had any funky heart rhythms going on. I didn't know that, but what I have done since then, I have bought me a cardio mobile because, what is key to a stroke is the atrial fibrillation, but I brought me one of those so that I'm able to keep up with my personal EKG. But, looking back, other than blood pressure, that was the only thing I had then that I probably still have now. But like I said, it was under control. I've never been a smoker because oftentimes smoking and the history of smoking is typically something that can cause stroke because of, the smoke and the caffeine typically clogs the arteries. But I've never smoked a day in my life, and so I've never been a drinker of alcohol or anything. So it was so they're still kind of baffled right now as to, what happened with me, other than maybe some atrial fibrillation that I didn't know anything about. That may have been happening, because typically what happens with atrial fibrillation, your heart throws these rhythms, and as it throws these funky rhythms, because your heart is somewhat like the electrical system of your body, almost like the electrical system of a house, and so maybe it had been happening. I didn't even know about it, and because of that, it causes blood to pool, and when the blood pools, of course, those clots kind of go up to your brain, and that's what happened with me. But it didn't have anything to do with blood pressure. It didn't have anything to do with smoking. Only thing they would begin to even research if there was anything in my family history, but I had none of my uncles or father or grandfather, none of them died from stroke. Now, my concern was always maybe possible cancer, but of course I've had checks for that, but nothing with cancer. But I had no pre-existing condition with a family history of strokes.
Okay. What about with females, Pastor Kelly? I noticed
there was none in my family as far as grandmother or aunts. None of them had a stroke. Now, the amazing thing, though, is since then, my brother, he's not my oldest brother, but he's my brother next to me, he had a stroke in October of 2020, and he has since then passed. And so, and he, again, if you know my brother, he is cool as a cucumber, so he didn't have any high stress in his life, but yet he had a stroke, so we didn't know if that was some kind of maybe congenital or family issue. And my blood doctor has been doing work to see it, because there is some things that have sometimes some congenital issues that they study to see. And I've told my daughters about it to make sure they get the blood test to assure they don't have any of those conditions, from the family trait or bloodline. But that's kind of where it started. None of my uncles or grandparents before me, but it started with me, and of course, as I mentioned, my brother as well.
Okay. Again, my condolences on your brother. I knew him. I did know he was your brother, and I said that to you on Facebook. Let
Yes,
me
sir.
just list those things that you've gone over for our audience as factors for a stroke: obesity or overweight, hypertension, high cholesterol, cigarette smoking or drinking, as you mentioned. Those are usually the major factors. And you also hit on the other one, hereditary, if someone in your family had. I've had experience with a stroke. I haven't had one myself, but my mother had a stroke like you, and she was partially paralyzed in the beginning, but she had a complete recovery.
Praise God.
And you know, later on she died, but she was much older than you are. You know, she was like in her late 80s or early 90s, because you know she
Right.
died at 98. Okay, let's.
Now, Alvin, I will also add that stress can be a leading cause, because again we talk about the atrial fibrillation of the heart. So
Right.
stress itself can cause the heart to begin to throw those rhythms that cause the blood to pool. So I will add that as well.
Okay, and in your profession, that would probably be up there.
It could, yes, sir. It certainly could.
Okay,
I think about my good friend and pastor in the city. Many people knew years ago, about 9 to 10 years ago, Pastor William Robinson. He also encountered a stroke, and as he gave me his testimony, he testified that he was under major stress during that point of his life. And so, yes, stress certainly for pastors could be one.
My name is Pastor William L. Robinson, and I serve as pastor at the First Baptist Church of 811 S.A. Jones Drive into my 32nd year as pastor. In the month of August of 2010, my attention span but time was steady going by, escalating. I believe then it got up to 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I think I got that shot within 20 minutes. And I understand that medication had just got to West Memphis a week before I had my stroke, and I was the first patient they used it on. I couldn't fathom the fact all this was happening to me. And I tried to keep myself well and healthy, but 3 hours a day. It was very devastating, and I did have to have some counseling because it was a traumatic experience. And from August all the way to November, even when I was released from the hospital, I had outpatient therapy then. And so from there in the hospital, 22 pills a day, pills for this, pills for that. It was 22 a day. And I'm down to 8 pills now. I do exercise, lost a lot of weight during that time. But when you look back for me as a pastor, that's one thing you think, can't nothing happen to you. But I beg to differ now. You can be pretty well active and involved, but I do know a lot of it was stress related. You got to, if a person can eliminate stress. And when I had the stroke, I weighed 240 pounds as well. And that hospital with the right eating, and I got down to 215 in the hospital. When I look back, the main thing I feared disability more than dying. I just couldn't see myself, dragging my arm, my leg, just being disabled, what I've been used to. But God brought me through, along with the medication. I still have to give God, the credit for pulling me out, giving me another chance. And I can tell anybody there's still life after a stroke.
Okay, what has been the most difficult part for you so far with the recovery?
I would say that the slow progress, because as I mentioned, on my left side, I'm able to move better than I was. Me and my wife just continue to praise God for my progress, but like I couldn't move my shoulders. I couldn't move my bicep and tricep and my elbow, but now I'm able to move all those. I can move my hand up right now, but now we're just waiting because it's typically slower as it goes down the furthest from your brain. So right now I'm still trying to get my fingers, back, the mobility back in my fingers, but it's probably the slow progress of healing and dealing with that. But because they teach anybody that if you're gonna have a stroke, that recovery is a marathon and not a sprint. And so I have to tell myself all the time that it's a marathon and not a sprint. Because when you're a pastor, you're very impatient. You want and a alpha man like myself, you want to control situations. And I want it to happen like yesterday, but it ain't happening as fast as I want it to happen. So I would say the most difficult part has been the slow progress and, of course, the immobility of my left side.
Okay, have you found physical therapy to be of use or not?
Oh, without a doubt. Yes, sir. Physical therapy has been my best friend. And they told me I went to a PTI, Physical Therapy Institute, and they told me they had never seen anybody as determined as I have been when it comes to therapy. And so I did. It was so helpful for me. I did physical therapy. I did occupational therapy. I did speech therapy. And, of course, I graduated from speech therapy within about 2 to 3 months. Of course, there's still some residual of the left side of my face because my stroke was on my right side, but it affected my left side. So there's still some slow speech, that happens as a result of me still trying to build those muscles back up. Because one thing about stroke, it totally weakens your whole body. And, of course, my left side of my face, even though I'm probably my worst critic, my wife tells me all the time, you sound normal, but, I know myself. And so I would say the physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapists are just very critical to recovery. And not only what you're told to do when you go to therapy, but what you do beyond therapy. And that's my place of trying to encourage other survivors is to do not just what they say, but do more than what they say. Right now, I can still walk 2 miles. I go out, I can walk 2 miles at a good pace. I'll leave my wife. She tells me, you go on. I'll be here when you get back. So I'm so determined in my therapy because I'm determined to not just take it easy, take it light. I tell people I'm determined to take it back as much as God would allow me.
Mm-hmm. I agree with your wife. Your voice sound the same. Your recall seemed to be excellent. There's no delay in what you want to say and what you're thinking, which is a good sign because normally when you're dealing with stroke patients, their speech pattern is different. They can't recall their words, and usually it's dragging somewhat, but you're not having any problem with that. We're almost finished with this segment. So tell me, is there something that you've learned in this process that you wish someone would have told you before you had your stroke that would be helpful to them?
Before I had the stroke?
Right.
Okay, I wish someone probably would have told me about I wish I would have had a support group to engage in because again, I went to that one group and because it wasn't what I would look for, I didn't go back. But if I would have redone it, I would have just continued to try to find an appropriate support group that really fit my needs because I think it would have propelled me down mentally down the road a little bit more. But because I had to do it by myself, me and my wife, I didn't have that. But I don't think I would give up as quick. I would have just found something. But that's why I'm doing what I'm doing to give people what they need. But I would have engaged and been more active in a support group.
Okay. Does talking about it help or not?
Oh, yes, sir. Without doubt, it certainly helps me my story because, as in every testimony, it builds your own faith. And so every time I'm able to share it, it does, and certainly, being, what I would say, and I give God all the glory for this, being high profile, being very well known in the city, because we all have a story to tell, but oftentimes when it comes to the church, oftentimes we want to take our story and we want to just keep it to ourselves, not realizing the impact and the effect that it can have on so many others. Just me sharing my story has been amazing of how many people have come to me and said, hey, I want to be a part of that. I have an aunt that needs to be a part of that. So yes, it helps me tremendously.
100%. This is Alvin with Community Health. I'm talking to Pastor Kevin Kelly from Second Baptist Church. We will be back in just a moment, so please stay tuned.
When someone is having a stroke, every minute counts. Just as putting out a fire quickly can stop it from spreading, treating a stroke quickly can reduce damage to the brain. If you learn how to recognize the telltale signs of a stroke, you can act quickly and save a life, maybe even your own. For both men and women, look for these 5 signs of a stroke, all of which come on suddenly. 1. Numbness or weakness in the face, arm, or leg, especially when felt on just one side of the body. 2. Confusion, including trouble speaking or understanding speech. 3. Trouble seeing, from one or both eyes. 4. Trouble walking, or problems with balance or dizziness. 5. Headache, especially a severe one that comes on suddenly. The clock begins ticking as soon as you spot the signs of a stroke, because some treatments can only be used if the patient reaches the hospital in the first 3 hours after symptoms appear. So don't wait. Call 911 right away and get the person to a hospital immediately, even if the symptoms go away. If you think someone is having a stroke, remember the word FAST. F is for face. Ask the person to smile and check whether one side of their face is drooping. A is for arms. Have the person raise both arms and see if one arm drifts downwards. S is for speech. Ask the person to repeat a short phrase and notice if their words sound slurred. And finally, T is for time. If you spot any of these signs, call 911 right away to get the person to a hospital fast. Strokes are medical emergencies. The sooner a patient gets treatment, the better their chance of a good recovery.
And now, back to Community Health with Alvin Simmons.
This is Alvin with Community Health, and I am extremely pleased and blessed to have Pastor Kevin Kelly with us today, and we're talking about stroke, an experience that I would tend to say almost every family in America is probably going to confront in one form or the other. And as I said earlier, my mother had a stroke years ago, and the one thing I'm sure Pastor Kevin is thinking about this, that we all think about, they say if you have one, you're probably going to have another one, and eventually you're probably going to have one that's going to take you on out of here. Nobody knows how quickly they're going to come or whatever. But anyway, Pastor Kevin has started a program at his church. I'm going to say at his church. It may be somewhere else. So Pastor Kevin, tell us more about the program. Who can participate? Is it open to the public? Anything you want to share with us?
Yes, sir, Alvin. Our support group, and I say our because it's both me and my wife. We have partnered together. When I wanted to do this, I asked her if she would do it for me or do it with me, because I knew it was going to be about survivors, but as well it was going to be about caregivers. I'm handling this and leading and facilitating the survivors portion, and my wife is helping to lead the caregivers, because if I tell you how amazing she was and she is as it relates to my recovery and giving me care, it has just been amazing. Wonderful. The woman that God has given me, and she has been the epitome of the vow that, in sickness and in health, that she would honor and that she would cherish me and that she would love me. She has been the epitome of that commitment and that vow, and it just makes me love her all the more. And it has really deepened our relationship. And every time she has helped me put on the tie, every time she has helped me put on socks, it makes me love and appreciate her all the more. And so she helped me to start this group. And of course, I am a visionarian, so I believe in writing the vision. So I wrote it down, everything I wanted this to be about. And so, first of all, it is a faith-based group. So it will be for anybody that has had a stroke, be it a survivor or a caregiver, that don't mind honestly accepting the faith of the fact of faith, because we put faith in front of this, because so this is may not be for everybody, but if somebody understands the idea of faith and honoring God and recovery, then this group could be for them. Again, it is called Hope. As I mentioned earlier, it has 3 pillars of purpose, and that is inspiration, education, and relation. So we're about inspiring one another, because one thing about the stroke process and recovery is that I can remember, if I could be very candid and honest, remember being very depressed, and I can remember going to the doctor. My wife, she begged and cried for my doctor to give me something, and oftentimes we at this church, we think we can just pray things away. way, and just and I believe in prayer, but I understood at the point that I was at as an alpha man that loved to control things and have been this very high profile man. I knew I needed something more than just prayer, and so she went to the doctor. I'll never forget the day she just cried out to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna put you on something," and he did, and it helped to kind of ease me. I remember the first time we went to a movie. We went to go see Bad Boys, the last edition. I was in there, Alvin. I promise you, maybe 5 minutes. I got to huffing and puffing. We were in the middle of the theater. Of course, it was the first night. The movie was packed. The anxiety just began to overwhelm me. I began to do that, and I got to go. Got to go. And I ended up leaving out of the movie probably about 5 minutes before it was over. I had to go down and sit at the bottom of it because I couldn't stand being all around those people. And so she's been that kind of, she was like, breathe, and so but we knew we had to get some medicine, and so it has helped to kind of bring some sense of balance in me, and so and that's the kind of thing that we do in our support group. We kind of allow people to know that these things are not foreign, and that you get all the help you can need. You've already kind of mentioned the statistics about what stroke can do and reoccurring in your life, but of course the big part of that is taking your medications. When we talk about muscle relaxers for the muscle stiffness, as well as the blood thinners to prevent you from having a stroke again. So my doctor told me, if you take this blood thinner, which now I'm on the Eliquis, he said if you take it, you're probably 90% in the 90th percentile range of this not occurring again, but you got to take your medicine. And so I take that religiously every day and every evening. We're about educating, we're about inspiring, we're about building relationships. We have nurses to come. My daughter is a nurse. She spoke at our last meeting, and she was there, just did an outstanding job on helping to educate. My therapist will be there this coming month, and then I have physicians. My Botox doctor, he's my neurologist, but he's now treating my stiffness with Botox, which is a new form of therapy that most people don't know anything about because we've only just kind of been used to baclofen, things like the Xanadine that deals with the muscle weakness over the whole body and not just specifically to the area that is affected by the stiffness. But Botox, you can inject it into the affected area, limb, to kind of deal with the stiffness of it. And so I'm believing God for recovery and healing because I'm doing everything I can. I'm trying to educate others, inspire others, as well as we use things along with the caregivers. We use things, we alliterate with P's. We talk about you got to push them, you got to have patience with them, and you got to be positive around them. So these are the P's that my wife deal with. Push them, be patient with them, and remain positive around them. So that just kind of give you some kind of gist of what and anybody else can be a part of it, faith-based. If they would like to, we meet every fourth Monday via Zoom. If they will contact me on my Facebook page, I will make sure they get the information. They can have my vision statement written down, and I will also give them the Zoom information. They can join with us. Our meetings typically look like we have introductions. After we do introductions, then we will have some time. We'll have what we call an education moment, an empowerment moment. Well, that's when I have the doctor or the nurse or the therapist on to speak, and I may even speak from my own story. This last time we talked about the marathon mindset. Then we'll have an education moment for the caregivers, and then we would typically have a hero-shero story. A hero-shero story is somebody that has encountered a stroke, that have lived through it, and now they have gained their mobility and their quality of life back. This upcoming month, we're going to have Pastor William Robinson, who had a stroke 9 years ago. He's going to be our hero story, and we use those stories because when I had a stroke, I had everybody else talking to me about how things would get better, but it wasn't anybody that ever encountered a stroke. I needed someone to speak to me that had encountered a stroke, and so that's what we do in our group, and I want to be that for other people and individuals.
Wonderful, wonderful. About how many people you say are participating so far?
In our first call, we had 4. In our second call in the month of March, we had 14. In this upcoming call, because I begin to put this out in the church as well on Facebook Live, we are now scheduled to have 24 people on the call. Okay. And I'm just so excited. I'm so geeked about being able to fulfill my purpose even after my story. And so and I'm hoping even after this call that even more will come and be a part of it. They just reach out to me. and I'll have a way to be able to facilitate the way it stays very timely, but also that we're able to do it and accomplish, our goal. Even if that means breaking off into groups, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. But yes, we 14 and now 24 this upcoming month of April.
Excellent. Let me just give a few more stats while you're thinking there.
Okay.
That there's a stroke 1 every 20 seconds, I believe, and there's 130,000 deaths a year. And just imagine you're one of the lucky ones.
Right.
And that someone dies about every 4 minutes from a stroke. And in the minority community in particular, these are some things that I didn't know. For non-Hispanic blacks, about 53 times more likely to have a stroke. The total group, for men, 59, for women, 48 compared to the rest. And something that I found really interesting, if you're non-Hispanic black, meaning you come from Africa or somewhere else, your chances are 1.7. So that tells you it's got to be something about dietary life of the black American here. Something to do with that. Because if you're black and you come from Africa or somewhere else, those levels are not that high. And that, because from seeing you, I haven't seen you in a while, but as you were saying, you weren't overweight, where we know in the black community, overweight is a big thing. Are you all talking to the people anything about their eating habits?
Oh yes, sir. We had a spring conference last night, and part of our conference, one of the speakers was on fitness, and so yes, sir, we're doing everything we can to educate. And I was going to say another issue, when you talk about the black community is, and this is the hereditary issue, is that I think the black population, we have this. Many of us could have this coagulating factor which causes your blood to coagulate, which simply means to clot. And so that's one thing we can do studies on, and we can go have blood tests to see if we have any of that hereditary factor that causes us to have a high coagulating. And I forgot to tell you this, Alvin, is that they figured that I had to have some kind of coagulating issue because I didn't share this with you because I had a stroke in November 12th. I got out of hospital, and then shortly after that, about the 8th of December, I went back into the hospital because of taking the Eliquis along with the aspirin. Of course, they had me on a high dose of aspirin to keep me from clotting again. I turned around and I had a GI bleed. And then, no, my second hospitalization wasn't a GI, that was a third one. And that was around the 28th of December of 2019. But my second hospitalization, which was about 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital, I had a pulmonary embolus, which, of course, that's just another clot in the lungs. And so they figured maybe I had to have some kind of a coagulating factor in my blood that caused me to, first of all, have a stroke and then to turn around again and have a pulmonary embolus. And the embolus was worse than the stroke because that was, gave me difficulty in breathing. And so I'm going back to the coagulating factor of the African-American blood factor.
Okay, Pastor Kelly, we're almost out of time. Some closing words you want to share with the audience?
Well, I just want to encourage them. You use those statistics of the 70%. I told them I may have a 70% chance, but I have 100% God. And I was determined that I shall live and not die. And if death is my fate, it will not be because I'm not doing everything I should do. And so I agree with you in your purpose of this call. We need to do everything that we can do for our physical body, which is God's temple. And I thank you so much for this opportunity to share my story. And I hope it blesses someone. And you be blessed today.
Well, listen, I've been blessed just listening, to it. So I'm sure it will. Pastor Kelly, I want to thank you for, number one, your boldness in stepping up and taking the lead to talk about this subject to the general public and not being ashamed. Maybe that's the reason you're the alpha male, right? And you got the, the largest church, I'm going to say African-American church in Arkansas, because you're willing to take a stand and by all means to trust in God. Again, thank you for coming to be with us. It's been a pleasure having you. I hope you'll come again soon.